Great. So it's 10:02. I know that Rudy Ann is still transitioning from a previous meeting, but I'm going to start with introductions and just telling who this recorded session is intended to be for, and then have our other agency staff introduce themselves, and we'll get started if there aren't any other burning questions. Sound okay? I'm Erin Weeks-Earp, and I work at the Higher Education Coordinating Commission. I'm on a team called Academic Policy and Authorization, and there my focus is working with the public universities. I'm going to ask Eric to introduce himself and pass it along.
Hi, everyone. Eric Juneman, Career Connected Learning Specialist with the Higher Education Coordinating Commission. I'm in the Office of Community Colleges and Workforce Development. And work in all things, I would say, secondary to post-secondary transition. And Osvaldo.
Good morning, everybody. Osvaldo Avila with the Higher Education Coordinating Commission, and I'm part of the Equity and Inclusion Specialist under the Executive Director's Office. Welcome, and I'll pass it to Dan.
Morning, everyone. Dan Farley. I am the Administrator for Research and Accountability as of August 1st. I'm still acting Director of Assessment until we are able to hire a permanent position. So I just moved into a new position at ODE. I'm still there, and I haven't lost anything that I have learned about assessment. So I'll still be sharing that just in a different way. And I will ask Julia to introduce herself.
Well, let me see if Julia and Jim want to introduce themselves, that's fine. Oh. But really, it's okay just to be an audience member as well.
Okay, gotcha.
Rudy Ann just joined us, and if you're ready, Rudy Ann, we all just told our names and that we work for Higher Education Coordinating Commission. Would you like to do that?
Sure. Happy Friday, everybody. Buenos dias. Good morning. My name is Rudy Ann Rivera Lindstrom, and I'm the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the HEC. Welcome.
Wonderful. So we have a small but mighty audience today, and what we're doing is we're recording this session so that other folks in our colleges and universities can learn about the results of the survey that we administered in the spring. So let me just start us off by saying this session is to report back to our post-secondary partners about the results of the survey we administered in April and May of 2022. We heard from about 150 administrators, faculty, and student services staff about their impressions and their professional expertise around transitions between high school graduates transitioning to their institutions. We're going to go through the results pretty quickly, and then we want to know what are your concerns, questions, and feedback on how we're moving forward. So are there any other burning questions, or is there anything I didn't mention for the state team? All right, I'm going to screen share the report. Oh, Dan's going to screen share, sorry, for the first few minutes and give an overview of how this feedback fits in with the ODE project.
Thanks, Erin. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to run through some quick slides, and I'll try to stay within about a 10-minute parameter if I can, but I'm happy to address questions as well. And I don't have to jump off immediately if it's helpful for me to stay. Thanks for inviting me. I'm happy to be here to discuss ODE's implementation of Senate Bill 744 that passed in 2021. I'm going to draw, of course, your attention specifically to how our partners in higher education participated in that process. Many of you who are on this webinar right now. ODE has partnered with education and community partners, including HEC staff, throughout the entire year to generate a report that I will talk a little bit about. The final report for Senate Bill 744 will include a brief history of Oregon's graduation requirements, a review of other states' graduation requirements, a summary of the multifaceted engagement process, and we were asked specifically in the bill to respond to 2 determinations about whether Oregon's graduation requirements were equitable and implemented equitably. And then we were also charged with making recommendations to the legislature and state board that would allow for Oregon's graduation policies to be more equitable, inclusive, and accessible. So that is what the report is intended to do. I'll send the report to all who participated in the development process. So all review team members, all engagement team members, all writing team members, all engagement partners will get a copy of the report, which will be linked to the Senate Bill 744 Rules and Policies webpage that we have been using to share communications throughout the year. I have to share the report first, of course, that morning with the legislature and with the state board. And then I'll get to sharing it with all who were impacted and participated in the process thereafter. So that's the general timeline. I wanted to start with a little bit of the humanity of the process. This is one comment that we got from a Senate Bill 744 participant in an engagement process. When people feel appreciated and comfortable in school, they will meet the benchmarks. Engage the whole child, you'll get what you want. So there were a lot of themes that kind of came to light during the conversation. The engagement process was actually quite beautiful in many ways. The conversations, the collegiality, the shared value system was pretty impressive to watch. So I'm going to give a brief overview of what the themes were and what the process included. So we partnered with Oregon's Kitchen Table to conduct a statewide K-12 survey that we included over 3,000 responses. Represented every county. Notably, about 300 of the respondents were either recent or current high school students. Also, unexpected and desirable was that over 50% of the respondents identified as belonging to one of the following groups. So from LGBTQ to SIA plus to a student who had changed high schools. So Senate Bill 744 really requires ODE to pay attention and bring those into the conversation who have been marginalized both historically and presently by our systems. So this was a result that gives me more confidence in the data that we gathered, because we did get feedback from the audience whom we were trying to focus upon. There were also about 200 paper surveys that were translated into multiple languages that were collected and entered by Oregon's Kitchen Table as well. In addition to that broad statewide survey, we had 19 regional community conversations. Those were organized by Education Service District across the state. We had 203 participants during those conversations, and participation ranged from anywhere from 1 to 333. So those are in very, low, sparsely populated counties or regions up to more highly populated regions. Oregon's Kitchen Table also worked through mediators to connect with specific youth, business, and community groups and held what were called community connector conversations. Those were small, informal connections that where we really wanted to meet those organizations on their terms. So within their timing, following their rules of engagement, agreements, shared agreements, and processes. So 24 of those meetings were held, including over 300 participants ranging from 2 to 30 per session. About 50% of those community connector conversations were conducted in languages other than English, primarily Spanish, Chinese, and Vietnamese. The final report from the Oregon's Kitchen Table engagement process was received by the department in June, and then those summaries were woven into the final report that we are publishing to the legislature, state board, and the general public on September 1st. ODE, even though it was not required by the bill specifically, the department engaged with educators and administrators as well, because we, of course, didn't want to ignore those who are engaged in implementing the current graduation requirements. So this outlines a list of the groups with whom we engaged, including students. And I mostly wanted to draw your attention to the fact that it wasn't required by the bill, and nevertheless, we did go through the process of engaging with educators, particularly high school counselors. We felt were critical to incorporate, as well as migrant education coordinators who work with students who both have language diversity and experience mobility as well. We had many higher ed partner connections throughout the process. So higher ed staff participated on all of the teams for Senate Bill 744. So on the review team, the engagement team, and the writing teams. So a lot of the report was, when it was in draft form, was reviewed by some of your partners. There were two really impactful research projects that higher ed partners conducted for us, HEC partners. One was a post-secondary partner survey that Aaron referred to earlier that you will discuss in more detail in a little bit. So I'm not going to give you too much detail, but know that it had a really central piece in terms of the report. It's an appendix that is included in the report, as well as a summary of the findings is included in the report. It addressed how prepared Oregon high school graduates are for post-secondary education, how admissions requirements determine college readiness, particularly in relation to the assessment of essential skills, recommendations for high school diploma requirements that will support transition to post-secondary education and training. So that was the survey component in the survey report, and Aaron led that work and had support from Rudy Ann and Eric and others, I believe. The impact, the second report was one led by Shonda, Amy Cox, and several on this team as well. Ben Tate helped us get the data. Was the impact of the assessment of essential skills on first year post-secondary outcomes. That report was really central for us, specifically because we had differing perspectives during the engagement process about whether the assessment of essential skills requirement was actually meeting its need or goal, which was to protect student interests, to ensure that students basically weren't quote unquote graduated before they were ready, that they had a basic set of skills that they could carry with them after matriculating from high school. So a couple of the themes that emerged from the engagement process. There was a strong sentiment that we cannot have a one-size-fits-all graduation process. We have to, of course, we want some similarities and expectations, but we also know that in order to make a graduation or K-12 educational experience relevant for students, it has to be customizable as well. One important theme that was repeated over and over, and you will see reflected in the report many times, is that graduation requirements, addressing the inequities in graduation requirements is an important part of the conversation. However, the inequities in the educational outcomes that are observed on the graduation side are actually embedded to the entire K-12 system. So we heard from families consistently that the graduation outcomes that we're experiencing in Oregon have to do primarily with inequitable access to high quality learning experiences and contexts that their children, their students experience throughout their K-12 time in Oregon. Connected to the first bullet, participants wanted to ensure that whatever process we develop appreciates students' individual strengths, the way that we all learn differently, and the variety of environments that students are in, both in and outside of school. So again, that speaks to a steering away from a one-size-fits-all approach to the recommendations. Another theme that was common was that schools, districts could benefit from having more culturally appropriate supports throughout school environments as they are trying to help students meet them. This was particularly the case for engagement participants who identified as Black, Indigenous, or Native, and for families from immigrant and refugee communities. LGBTQ2SI+ students also pointed to supports like affinity groups and school social workers as critical to helping them meet requirements. So kind of behind this theme is what sort of capacity and resources do we need to put in place to ensure that more welcoming environments are occurring, throughout a student's experience in our schools. Another theme was that there was, of course, still strong support for the 3 R's, math, reading, writing, or reading, writing, arithmetic, as they used to be referred to. There's also a desire to further explore how we address the required credits in those subjects and how prescriptive it is, as well as how we determine proficiency. So historically, how we've determined proficiency is the combination of prescriptive credit requirements. Specifically in mathematics, there's prescribed courses that students have had to take and pass, in addition to the assessment of essential skills demonstration of proficiency. So there was a strong sentiment that those stances needed to be reevaluated. Second bullet's related to what I just shared too, is that the math requirements, because of their prescriptive nature, identifying particular courses that students had to take and pass, were identified as a barrier. So that was true across families and educators in the engagement process. So the recommendations that we have synthesized try to address all of these concerns. Another theme slide, and then I'll transition a little bit to a kind of complementary survey that occurred with workforce and industry. There remains interest in examining whether our current system, where we allow for multiple diploma options, is serving students well. We present data early on in the report that shows that a lot of those outcomes are predictable by race and ethnicity, as well as IEP status and EL status, which leads us to be concerned about whether they're being implemented equitably, of course. It was also a theme that families need better information, clearer information about what the diploma options for their child are and what consequences might result from selecting a particular diploma path. Finally, there was a reevaluation, if you will, of what skills Oregon still thinks are essential skills, or whatever label ends up resulting from that. But there was a strong theme that the essential skills were developed in 2009. They were relatively current for that time, but the world has changed since then. There were some themes that were still common, and some of these are essential skills. One was very common, which is that our families don't feel that their students, when they graduate, have sufficient financial literacy. Thanks, Aaron. And critical thinking, civics, various types of communication, interpersonal, etc., and workplace and social skills. So you'll certainly recognize, if you've been following the essential skills aspects that connect to that, but there also are new areas that the essential skills don't include. So that points to the need to look at the skills that we deem to be the most critical central professional skills as part of this conversation. So in addition to the survey that Aaron will talk with you all about, we worked with partners in workforce and industry to conduct a similar survey. This survey was broader. So it had a prescriptive component where there were about 20 different professional skills that the respondents had to rank. Then there was an open-ended response where respondents spoke to and named what they felt the professional skills that graduates need most are. And our psychometricians were able to take both, cross-reference them, and then this was the validated set. This was the top 10. There are several more. I think there were 27 total. But I at least wanted to draw your attention to what workforce and industry deems to be the most important professional skills for Oregon's high school graduates. The other thing that I will name about these skills is they are all culturally laden and would require additional engagement to determine what the words mean, of course, and come up with shared definitions. And second, to ensure that implementation or design of any curricula or approach to learning addresses the culturally responsive lens that would need to be in place. Many of these, as you're looking down them, professionalism, communication skills, those have historically centered in white dominant cultural values. So we would certainly need to unpack that as part of the next wave of engagement. With that, I'll see if there are any questions and stop sharing if I can figure out how to do that. Here we go.
Thanks very much, Dan. I know that was a lot of information to
Sorry, yeah.
Talk into a brief presentation, but I think it's really helpful to give the context to how we contributed through a survey of our higher ed partners and institutions. So I'll transition right into sharing the report with folks here on the webinar. Osvaldo, are you okay with doing questions 1 and 2 about who participated from what institutions, or and let me know if not, because we haven't really checked in with each other about the order. Are we good? Just let me know. No?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, if I can read them off there, off the screen that
Yeah,
you shared.
I'll share screen really quick, and then we'll take turns. So just for the launching in, this is the survey. The opportunity to review and provide feedback is what we're doing right now. So I will jump to the top of the report. This is going to be posted on the Higher Education Coordinating Commission website. Can folks see that?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so don't get dizzy as we scroll down. We're just going to scroll through the report as we present it, just to be really simple and clear. Questions 1 and 2. This will probably be a useful video. Go ahead, Osvaldo, and thank you again for the time.
So as I'm reading here, so out of the survey results, the characteristics of respondents among the 148 Oregon post-secondary education respondents, the majority were from a public university, followed by community colleges, as we can see in figure 1, 54% of public universities, 39% community colleges, and then private career school 2%, and private college universities 5%.
Move on.
And yes, please scroll down. And here you can see the makeup of our individuals that responded, who kind of areas that they're representative. Our student services were 21%, administration 21%, and then instruction 58%.
Okay.
Go ahead. In this figure, a number of survey respondents by sector and area of work, and it breaks it down between our private career schools and community colleges, our private college and universities, and the public universities in those sector areas as well. And if you're interested in learning more, I think we can break it down really where our faculty members, really high respondents in the public university sector, and our biggest population of respondents in that area. Go ahead.
So this is Eric. If you're ready, Eric.
All right, I'm ready. Okay, so questions 3 and 4 on the survey, focusing on perceptions of preparation for post-secondary education and training. So question 3 asked respondents to rate how sufficiently prepared Oregon high school grads are to be successful in post-secondary education and training. And you'll see here in figure 4 that basically half, 51%, said they were close to sufficiently prepared, followed by 28%, the 41 bar on figure 4, said just a little bit prepared. 12% only said sufficiently prepared. Go ahead. And digging into the themes that were identified, there were a lot of rich comments provided here, speaking to perceptions of preparation. And we saw some definite themes emerge from those comments. First of all, the strongest theme, these are really in rank order, was lack of mastery. That really spoke to people's perceptions of lack of mastery of specific subjects and content areas. Noted were things like writing and math and technology, and just a lack of mastery of those skills. Another theme that emerged, secondly, was the contrast between the environments of the high school environment and the college environment being key to a key impact on the differences or a key impact on preparation for post-secondary education and training. So things like, speaking to how the high school environment may be focused on repeating information or following detailed instructions, and the higher ed environment being more open-ended, self-directed, requiring more advanced critical thinking. The third theme that emerged on that third question was just a theme around variation. That variation is very broadly used here. That meant preparation for post-secondary varied based on things like geography, what part of the state was a student coming from, urban versus rural, inequities in resources and access to resources, both within the school environment and outside of the school environment. What was the availability of culturally responsive pedagogies and representation in the curriculum? And what were those resources to tap into strengths and supports for marginalized communities? Fourth was navigation, and speaking to that preparation level of students being impacted by sometimes struggling to be able to navigate all of the services and resources and complexity in the higher education environment. And then finally, pandemic impacts were noted as the final theme in question 3. Speaking to students' preparation for post-secondary education and training having been negatively impacted by the pandemic. And yeah, go ahead, Aaron. And so this figure 5 speaks to a little bit more kind of just breaking down the sufficiently, close to sufficiently, just a little or not at all prepared responses, and really showing that lack of mastery of specific content like writing, math, technology, etc. Let's go ahead and just go to the next question. Question number 4 asked people, yeah, it just starts right at the bottom of that last page, Aaron. Asked respondents to speak to how current high school diploma requirements are they equitable for all communities of people, especially Black, Indigenous, people of color, culturally and linguistically diverse people, and the Confederated Tribes of Oregon, people with a disability, people who live in rural areas, people living in poverty or low income, and other people without privileges offered to systemically dominant culture and populations. Okay, so the findings from this question, number 4, included 1 in 5 respondents really said they don't know as an answer to that. And remaining 80% of respondents, 1 in 4 neither agreed nor disagreed, and 40% disagreed. So breaking that down a little bit more, 3 major themes emerged in the written comments. The first and most prevalent theme was about systemic bias. So respondents described biases in the education system, assessments used to measure learning, pedagogies, curriculum not being inclusive and not relevant to many students, especially racially, culturally, and linguistically marginalized students. Second theme that emerged here was a lack of access, and that really spoke to differences in sometimes based on geography, school size, the types of class offerings that are available, maybe lack of access to support services, the community resources. And so, yeah, I think I've covered that one, Aaron. And then the third most was prevalent theme for question 4 was an I don't know theme. That was a really strong bit of feedback we got. respondents said that they were not familiar enough with Oregon's high school diploma requirements to comment here. And then we wanted to note 2 additional themes that didn't rise to the level of feedback for those 3 that emerged as the strongest themes, but were worth noting. There were 14 respondents concerned that high school diploma requirements agreed that they're not equitable, but instead of citing a lack of access to resources, they did express concerns over things like lower standards. We wanted to note that and would like to work through that more with folks. The second less prevalent theme worth mentioning here was perhaps a misunderstanding of the term equity, with feedback from about 10 respondents saying that the requirements are equitable because the diploma requirements are the same for everyone, therefore they are equitable. So speaking to perhaps a misunderstanding of equity. Okay, I'm going to stop here. And I'm not actually sure who I'm passing it along to, perhaps Rudy Ann. Am I right?
I think Rudy Ann has question 7, and I will go ahead and talk about question 5 and 6, and I'll try and be brief. Question 5 was asking about what post-secondary institutions look for when they look for college readiness and are admitting students. I'm not sure. Okay. Overall, 74% of our respondents are looking at high school grade point average. Next, 66% are looking at scores on placement tests, including ALEKS, which is a math test, or Smarter Balance, which is administered in the 11th grade to all students. 61% are looking at their grades in specific subjects like reading, writing, and English courses. And then there's a large group of middle factors. Notably, only 21% of our respondents signaled that the type of high school diploma is important when they are admitting students. In question number 6, we asked about the essential skills that Dan referenced before, and we wanted to know how important those were in perceptions of students' college and career readiness. And some of our respondents encountered a technical error here, so we weren't able to calculate or use the commentary about essential skills, but we did have 100 and then 50 more respondents talk about which were the top most important essential skills. And here the ranking is the top of the scale. 1.3 was the most important to the most to the highest number of respondents, and that's think critically and analytically. The top 3 you can see here are think critically, and then read and comprehend texts, and write clearly and accurately. So those were our top essential skills. I'm not going to say more about essential skills now, but if folks have questions, they can reach out to us. Rudy Ann, are you ready to speak really briefly to question 7?
Absolutely. Thank you again, Erin, for leading this work, and welcome to everybody. So yeah, the last question has to do with recommendations for high school diploma requirements to support transition to post-secondary education and training. The biggest themes essentially were the need for, in the written responses, for academic subjects, definitely to continue, intercultural abilities and awareness and communication, pathways and transition supports, career and college readiness, learning maturity and responsibilities. I think you can scroll to the next So within each one, you know, folks still called out the need, of course, on fluency in math, reading and writing, the ability to decipher sources that are reliable, and identified other academic subjects necessary to be college ready, such as ethnic studies, communication, science, art, physical education, and social science. Most of those respondents were from universities. The next theme had to do with intercultural abilities and awareness and communication. It was the second big theme that emerged, that need to have global understanding, global readiness was really important. The third one was about pathways and transition supports. We've been hearing a lot more of that this past year around the notion of students accessing even the information to certain pathways and goal setting. And then, of course, the last one is the last one. You can scroll down. We're referring to, again, that essential skills and readiness, learner maturity and responsibility, you know, as a theme coming out of high school. So I'll leave it at there and let Erin wrap us up with the conclusion of this report.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much. So what we're going to do is post this report on the HEC website and share the link out through our communications channels and out with everyone who requested it. We're going to have a recording of this informational session available. And I want to make sure that if there are any questions right now, we hear from folks who are attending, or you can type your question in the chat. And I also should say that this was definitely a really strong team effort from the agency staff who are on the webinar now, and research and data team members who couldn't make it today, Shonda. And I appreciate all of your time and energy. And also, I was sending emails a lot, but it was really led by all of us working together. And this is a good report that we'll be working on during the academic year on a couple of the themes that we talked about today. Jim or Julia, if you have any questions, we're welcoming your input now.
Thanks very much. This has been interesting, and I had no idea that Jim and I would be the two people to listen live, but here we are. Maybe going back a little bit, one of the notes that someone made was that you're looking at high school experience, there was a desire and a shared value across the state that things be customizable and flexible, not a uniform kind of approach. What's interesting is I've spent a lot of time recently in conversations around transfer issues once students are in higher education, and sort of a move toward more uniformity, because of course if all the Lego pieces are the same, they fit together better. And so can you talk a little bit about whether that seems in conflict or not in conflict? Granted, customization and flexibility, I think, calls for more people power, right? To respond to an individual or a group of individuals takes more person effort than to say everyone be the same. But does that seem like a conflict, or just how might you respond to what feels a little different to me when I hear those two things?
Thank you for your question, Julia. And for those who don't know, Julia is the registrar at the University of Oregon. We already know each other. Is there anyone that wants to respond to that question, or should I give it a shot?
Give it a shot, Erin.
Rudy Young, who is our Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, has a really strong K-12 background. So if you have any thoughts, Rudy Young, on this question, feel free to jump in. But yeah, Dan mentioned that what the department was hearing from educators and from families, right? So this isn't necessarily something that can change overnight or that they can do, but they were hearing that a one-size-fits-all approach wasn't working well. So if we think about our systems, we can think about the outcomes we have are what the systems are designed to deliver. And so if we're not happy with our outcomes and they're inequitable, we got to think about how changing that system can change our outcomes. Directly to your question, whether or not K-12 can become more flexible, let's say, and it feels like at the same time higher ed is doing the opposite, that if it was many different individual paths and a very individualized higher ed path, and now we're narrowing or becoming more similar or trying to streamline things, I would hope that it means that the two systems are becoming more able to work together. So both taking a step towards a middle place, but not one becoming the other. And also, these are the findings that were heard from community. So it doesn't mean that the agency will be able to pivot or shift immediately to be something different overnight.
And then if I could add to, I think the larger conversation too, I think that we're seeing around K through 12 and post-secondary education, instead of blaming each other or which system is not preparing our students, right? We're working to shift on that conversation to let's meet where the students are, let's prepare ourselves to meet them, right? And so culturally shifting those systems together, I think that's a stronger collaboration so that we're not placing the blame on any one system, but we are serving our students more holistically, and we're assuring that our students are successful at both systems once they do graduate successfully and they do enter upon our post-secondary institutions.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you both, and I'd be happy to hear if Rudy Ann, did I say that right, has insights too. I absolutely want us not to be in a blame place. I think that's counterproductive and doesn't help anybody, because I think everyone has as a core outcome student success. And so to say, to also kind of waste time and energy blaming each other makes no sense at all. If we can't be coordinated, then that's very sad. And a middle ground sounds good. And so I guess what I would want to hold in my head is a sense of the flexibility that is being asked for and is a value in Oregon and is a human need, that continue across, all of education and preparedness and, our lives, so that, and that there's an acknowledgement that flexibility and customizing to some extent takes some time and is not as efficient as making everyone the same, and people aren't the same. And so middle ground sounds really good. And I guess just in the last 2 days, I've heard sort of a push toward be all the same, okay, in higher ed, and at least, this survey saying allow differences. And so middle sounds really good to me.
I love that, Julia. Thank you so much. I think your question is super important and super timely, especially as it relates when we're thinking through those alignment pieces. I think the ultimate goal for both sides is the removal of barriers, right? And we know what, to Aaron and Osvaldo's point on the K-12 side, and, having myself been an intervention specialist and an administrator at that level, what we saw happening or playing out was even just lack of access for a lot of our underserved students to even know there was a pathway they could choose. It was, there was lack of cultural responsiveness in process. There was delays to, depending if you were an English learner or a student with a disability or both, so I think the notion of flexibility was more about, okay, if we have at that level students that are facing barriers, right, which we know, how do we continue that path of high expectation and rigor for their goals, while at the same time supporting them as a whole, right? And so that's where I think that flexibility comes in. Just having worked through the High School Success Act implementation a couple of years back before my role here with the HEC, you know, there were situations, for instance, that, you know, the strictness on you missed one day this week, you can't turn in your assignment. And, you know, and there was no, you know, it wasn't about enabling the student, but having an empathy to keep them on a path to success, right? So that, when I think about flexibility, I think about that, and the assessment or need happening at that level. And of course, the transfer conversation at our level is like just huge, right? And I think for me, just coming from that DEI perspective, it's more about the flexibility of if they're in one institution and they started studying in this thing, you know, can we possibly transfer them, you know, to another institution without having necessarily to do it all over again, right? And what does that look like? Does it, you know, to minimize impact of costs, to minimize impact of falling behind, you know? So, but I think the alignment, to your point, of understanding and maybe defining better what that flexibility means, because so often it defaults into a deficit type of thinking, that it's one end to another and an extreme. It warrants just a greater conversation and the importance of focus on the need for us to keep collaborating at both levels to meet each other where we're at.
Thanks so much.
I have one other question, but I know my colleague Jim, kind of next door here in Oregon Hall, might have a question too, but let me toss my other one in. One of the things I thought was interesting in about the high school preparedness responses overall is I didn't hear, and maybe I just didn't catch it, any comments around COVID impacts. We've been reading so much about how, you know, this incoming freshman class, at least to college, and the class before them, and maybe the class before them, have been impacted, typically we thought negatively by COVID. I mean, certainly they've learned lots of resilience, but I was wondering if that bubbled up or if that didn't bubble up in what you heard from folks.
Julia, I'll jump in on that one. I think that did come up as theme number 5, most prevalent, fifth most prevalent theme on the third question about student readiness for post-secondary education and training was around pandemic-related impacts pandemic negatively impacting that readiness. So it was in there.
Hi everyone. Thanks for the information. I thought it was really interesting, and I appreciate you sharing. Jim Brooks, as Julia said, I'm right down the hall from her. I work heavily with financial aid, but I've kind of gotten pulled into this. I was filling in a little bit, representing us on the math admissions work group that's been happening as well. And I definitely saw some overlapping themes in the stuff that you shared today and what that group has been working on. 2 questions. One rather easy one initially. How soon will this report be available on the HEC website? You mentioned it would be out there at some point in time. And then secondly, the work groups like the math work group, will they have access to this, or have they seen some of this before? I mean, obviously there's HEC people leading that work group, so I'm guessing you've seen some of it as well. And will we at some point, taking into consideration all the things we've talked about today, will there be groups looking at other requirements beyond math and moving forward with some of the same concerns that we've raised around these?
Thanks, Jim. So how soon? Probably Monday. I would post it today, except I don't know where our communications director wants me to place it. So if you're eager to look at it, I can just email it to you as well, through Julia, but we'll post it very soon. And then also with a recording of this information session that talks through the report a little bit and gives contact information for HEC and for ODE on anyone who wants to follow up with questions that come to mind later. Thank you so much for mentioning the math work group and admissions. Yes, we've been trying to connect with those staff so that both those recommendations and these recommendations reach each other's audiences. I will follow up with them next week, but I think the largest steps will be taken this fall when ODE releases officially their report to the legislature about their recommendations on the high school diploma, right? So they have some specific determinations and recommendations, and those will be loud and clear about how K-12 districts need to respond. And we'll follow up after that with how higher ed can respond and support what the districts and the regions and partnerships are doing. So yes, we see this as the very first step in a process that'll likely last for a little while, and especially as those new K-12 math standards are implemented and students' coursework looks a little different. We'll see what happens, and we'll want to stay in touch so that, like Julia mentioned, our systems can communicate well and work together. One of the concerns that the report brought up was the number of sort of student transition facing post-secondary partners that were unfamiliar with officially what the high school diploma requirements are. And so that might be that they're instructors, but we'll want to follow up to make sure that the department is communicating out well with community, with partners, and with families. What are the high school diploma requirements now, and how can our institutions respond and continue to contribute feedback to the department and how they shape those. Does that answer your question? So how soon the math work group, and then what we'll do next. Anything else that we
No,
want to comment on?
Yeah, that was helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
I have another general question. Survey research is not my forte, so I depend and appreciate people who do that. Are the number of respondents kind of what was expected, sort of the standard for surveys of tools of these kinds?
It's a great question, Julia. It was what was expected, and it was also small. The survey was administered at the end of, the academic year, quickly, with about a week turnaround, and we were hopeful that we would get a good number of responses, but we were also acknowledged that we couldn't reach everyone. And so it was important that all of our sectors were included. You'll find in the report there were some institutions that responded in bigger numbers than others. There were other institutions that didn't participate, but generally we feel like this is a good slice of the expertise, right? This contributes important thinking, but it's not generalizable. It's not, something that we should go ahead and now, print laws about what we should do. So it leads and contributes to our work in important ways. It's like a work group, but just administered through a survey. And if you have any other questions, once you read through that section of the report, please reach out. Great. Well, it's 10:55. We're going to wrap up. I really appreciate you both for coming, and I really appreciate our HEC team for contributing so much to this work.
Yep.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Julia.
Bye.
Bye. James?
Sure.
Okay. So this will be the very end of the recording for 30 seconds. Maybe I can snip in the middle part, but if I don't, it's okay. Thank you so much, Eric, for making time today. We'll check in
My pleasure.
soon.
All right. Thanks,
All
Erin.
right. Bye. Yeah.